About 2 months ago, I began working on building my very first custom lightsaber by purchasing all the parts for what is known as the emitter, or the end the blade comes out of. If you'd like to check out my video about that, I've linked it in both the video description as well as in the cards, which is popping up right now. In that video, I explain how I found a site called MB-Sabers that designed a chassis that I absolutely love the look of and wanted to build one of my very own. After making the video about my emitter, I purchased some more parts and then waited for Shapeways to print them and ship them to me. It took a couple of weeks for them to arrive, but now I'm ready to take another step toward getting this thing built. Now, to make my lightsaber as authentic looking as possible, I wanted it to be built out of metal. But at the same time, since this is my very first lightsaber build, and I don't have any prior experience working with electronics like what is required to build a lightsaber like this, I felt it was a good idea to build the battery/soundboard compartment out of plastic this time around to hopefully keep me from frying stuff, including myself. I, of course, still want it to look like it's all made out of metal, so that means I had to try my hand at painting it to look like metal. The first thing I did to get started was grab some 220 grit sandpaper and started sanding all my pieces down. Sanding is the thing I've found you spend the most of your time doing when building a lightsaber like this. I did learn this lesson while building the emitter, but starting in on these parts gave me a nice reminder. Once I thought I had them all sanded down good, I tried fitting them together, only to find I needed to do some more sanding and filing in a few areas, but eventually everything fit together nicely and I was able to move on. To connect the battery housing with the crystal chamber and all the other parts of the lightsaber, you use some threaded brass rods. The rods I'm using came included with the Metal Master assembly kit from the MB-Sabers website. Since this part of the chassis is plastic, I was able to just kind of force the rods through to clear out any extra plastic left behind by the printing process. Had I gotten the metal one, I probably would have had to drill it out, so score 1 for plastic, making things a bit easier. With the threaded rods in position, I put a nut onto the end of each rod and then secured the nut in place with a dab of super glue. The next step was to peel the plastic off this little piece of clear acrylic. This piece goes between the battery compartment and the speaker housing and acts as a lens for an indicator LED located here. Since I'm planning to use an 18650 battery, I had to mark for and cut some notches into this lens to allow the 1mm brass rods to pass through, which are used to hold the battery and soundboard covers in place. I was then ready to start work on the speaker housing. So I got out my sandpaper again and sanded the housing down. I then cleaned the debris out of the speaker cover piece using the tip of a metal file, and then used a sanding wheel on my Dremel to get the outside surface of the speaker cover all nicely smoothed out. To help hold the speaker housing in the correct position, you need to use some of the M1.2 threaded rod included in the Metal Master assembly kit. I first marked and then tapped the holes those rods needed to go into on the base of the battery compartment using an M1 tap. I did one of the holes with an M1.2 tap and felt the rod threaded in a little looser than I would have liked, so I chose to use the M1 tap for the remaining holes. If I was doing this into metal, I would definitely have used the M1.2 tap for all the holes, since that's the size of the threaded rods. But since this was into plastic, the M1 worked great to get the rods started, and then they threaded in nice and snug. I then needed to figure out how long to make the rods, so I put the speaker chamber onto the bottom of the battery housing, threaded the rods in one at a time, and cut each of them to length. Again, these rods really just hold the speaker compartment in the correct place. To actually attach it to the battery housing, I needed to tap 3 screw holes on the inside of the speaker compartment and then thread in 3 M1.2 screws. This next step is kind of an optional one, but it is included in the instructions on MB-Sabers.com. And that is to cut 12 pieces of 1mm brass rod and glue them into the little notches here on the speaker housing. In the instructions, it says to cut these pieces to 8mm in length, but I just placed the end of a rod into the groove like so, and then marked and cut them with some wire cutters. I then checked to make sure the length was good by placing the piece into the groove, and once I had them all cut, I dabbed some super glue in the grooves, put the rod in place, and here is how it looks once I put the speaker cover back on. The final bit I did for now on the speaker chamber was spread some glue around the bottom edge here to glue this metal ring into place. I then removed the speaker chamber from the battery housing and began prepping the battery housing as well as the battery and soundboard covers for painting. I first masked off for the bits I wanted to paint on the battery housing, grabbed some clear primer, and primed everything up. I then moved on to priming the soundboard cover, followed by the battery compartment cover. Once the primer had dried, I moved on to painting and started with the rib details here on the side of the battery compartment. I then moved on to the top portion, which is also the bottom portion of the crystal chamber. I next painted the battery cover door, followed by the soundboard cover. I put 2 coats of paint on all the pieces and then let them dry overnight. The next morning, I used an agate burnishing tool on all my painted parts, which smooths out the finish of the paint a bit, and it also ended up rubbing a little bit of the paint off, which is a look I was actually going for on this. I want these pieces to look a bit distressed, like they've been used a lot and have some wear to them. Just for fun, here's a shot of the soundboard cover before burnishing it, and here's what it looks like afterward. Not a huge difference, but I definitely like the way it looks after burnishing. Next on my to-do list was to pull all the masking tape off the battery compartment, and then I took my small screwdriver and went around to different areas, scratching the paint off and some of the grooves and other spots to give my saber the grungier look I'm wanting for it. I then took all my painted parts outside and hit them with a couple thin coats of clear, and once everything had dried, I was ready to put in this piece, which is the soundboard / battery plate. I then reassembled everything and tried sliding it into my Graflex hilt to make sure everything fit, and as of right now, things are looking good. The next thing I need to do is start working on the crystal chamber, but that's going to have to wait for another day. Am I making a mistake not going full metal on this? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to check out my emitter video, that's right over here, and my review of the Roman Props Flashgun 8 Graflex hilt is right down there. Thanks so much for watching. Please do the YouTube things before you head out. They help a lot. Thanks.